for Meghan Markle because her sister Samantha ain't going anywhere.
I don't believe, and he doesn't believe, that there are kids, because you don't yank around and use a leg.
Meghan was having another baby at the same time that the rest of us did.
Yeah.
Appropriate, very warm, and the public knew nothing about that. It was like, I mean, there were so many different stories.
For years, one woman kept telling the same story and almost no one took her seriously. The media painted her as bitter. Online, people dismissed her as irrelevant. She was treated like the estranged half-sister holding a grudge, with nothing solid to support her claims. But she was right. Not a little right. Not, she may have had a point right. She was right about the sealed records, the polished-over past, and the stories that were never meant to surface. In time, even one of Britain's most respected royal biographers admitted it plainly. We all laughed at Samantha, and she was right, and everything she said has come true. So the real question is no longer whether Samantha Markle was telling the truth. It's what, exactly, she was telling the truth about, and why every paper trail tied to this story seems to suddenly end. To understand that, you have to start at the beginning, because the way Samantha was presented from day one mattered more than most people realized. Once Meghan's relationship with Harry became public, Samantha was quickly cast as the villain. The tabloids pushed the same image again and again: half-sister, estranged, disabled, struggling. The message underneath was always clear: don't believe her. She's jealous, unimportant, and trying to profit from a famous name she barely has a connection to. Even people who doubted Meghan kept their distance from Samantha, because siding with her felt like losing credibility before speaking. And to be fair, Samantha didn't always help her own case.
He'll leak their conversations to the media.
But Meghan's sister, Samantha Markle, says that is causing her father.
She was outspoken. She went on talk shows, wrote a book, and posted constantly on social media. To many people, that made her easy to dismiss. Meghan's image team understood that perfectly. Whenever Samantha spoke up, attention shifted to her behavior instead of the substance of her claims. But what she was saying was clear and consistent. She was not simply attacking Meghan as a sister or complaining about being excluded from the wedding. She was pointing to a larger pattern: stories that did not match, parts of the past that seemed carefully edited, and a public image that looked deliberately built rather than naturally formed. She repeated those claims calmly and long before supporting documents began to appear. At the time, most journalists, commentators, and royal watchers treated it as background noise. In 2017, 2018, and even 2019, that reaction made sense. It looked like a private family conflict spilling into public view, and those disputes usually seem bigger to the people involved than they do to anyone else. Then things began to change. Not suddenly, but gradually. The gaps Samantha had pointed out became harder to ignore. Documents that should have been simple were not. Timelines that should have been clear did not hold together. People who knew Meghan before Harry and had no obvious motive began describing someone who did not fully match the public image. As more of that came out, Samantha sounded less like a bitter relative and more like someone who actually knew what she was talking about. Tom Bauer, author of one of the most deeply researched books on Meghan and Harry, later said it directly. We laughed at Samantha, and she was right. Everything she said has come true.
About Meghan, so some would then suggest that the book is biased.
Well, it's not biased in the sense that I do my very best to...
That is not the opinion of some outsider on the sidelines. It came from someone who spent years studying original records, speaking with people who had direct knowledge, and checking one account against another. And his conclusion was simple. The woman people were told to ignore was telling the truth. What stands out when you look back at Samantha's comments is not how often she spoke, but how exact she was. She was not making vague accusations and hoping one would land. She pointed to specific gaps, specific records, and specific parts of Meghan's story that she believed had been cleaned up before the public ever saw them. That leads to the harder question: what exactly was she pointing to? This is where the story gets more complicated, and where the paper trail starts to disappear. People who knew Meghan before Harry often agree on one thing. It is not that she was unpleasant. Most describe her as charming, warm, and easy to be around. They do not paint her as cold or cruel. What they describe is something more exact, and in some ways more unsettling. Someone who always seemed to know exactly what she was doing and why. The word that appears again and again is not ambitious. Ambition is common, especially in Hollywood. The word people use is calculated, and that is a different thing. Ambition means wanting something and working for it. Calculated means planning the route long before others even see the destination. People in her social circle before Harry described someone who treated both personal and professional relationships like moves on a board. Not in a blunt or obvious way, but in a steady, consistent one. Each connection had a purpose. In every room she entered, she seemed to understand how it worked almost immediately.
She wants it to be all about her, and I could see exactly the reason why she wasn't invited. To really break it down, it's been a disservice.
That is not necessarily a flaw, but it does matter when you look at the choices she made. One detail many people dismiss as too odd to matter is the vision board story, but more than one person close to her has mentioned it separately. The claim is that Prince Harry was on her vision board before they ever met, that she had looked into him, knew he was single, and placed herself near the right people at the right time. A vision board by itself proves nothing. Plenty of people make them. What makes this detail more striking is the pattern around it. This was not a teenager with a celebrity crush. This was an adult woman with a career making a focused decision about a specific goal, and then following through. Her first known relationship with Joshua Silverstein when she was about 13 is not important on its own. What matters is that it appears to start a pattern that continues through her later romantic life. Before Harry, each major relationship seemed to improve her career, social position, or access to the world she wanted to enter. People who knew her then have openly pointed that out. Then there is Thomas Markle. It is well documented and not disputed that he paid for her education at Immaculate Heart High School. But the version of her background she shared publicly and reportedly with the royal family was different. It suggested struggle, family difficulty, and building her life without much support. By several accounts, the palace was given a carefully shaped version of Meghan's past. It was not a complete invention, but it was selective and strategically incomplete. And that matters because it is much harder to disprove what is left out than what is directly false. You cannot fact-check an omission. You cannot produce a document showing that someone failed to mention something. What you can do is speak to the people who were present, and the people who were there repeatedly describe events in a way that does not match the official version. Both Tom Bower and Andrew Morton reported this. They worked separately, had different sources, and took different routes. Yet both found that uncovering the real story of Meghan Markle before Harry was unusually difficult. Sources stopped talking. People who had agreed to speak suddenly pulled back. Places where records should have existed turned up empty. That kind of pattern does not usually happen by chance. What makes this more serious than simple image management is that some of what she was said to be hiding was not just embarrassing. It may have carried real personal and legal risk. And that becomes clearest not in gossip, but in the documents no one expected to be found. A lot of what is written online about Meghan is easy to dismiss. It often comes from anonymous forums, unverified social media accounts, or YouTube channels with no solid sourcing. That makes it easy to label anything uncomfortable as conspiracy and move on. But the California Birth Records Office issue was different. It was not a forum rumor or a video claim. It was a formal written request sent through the proper process using public information. No drama, no loaded language, just a researcher asking a government office for a routine records search. The name used in that search was Rachel Meghan Markle. That matters because many people do not realize it. Meghan is essentially a stage name. Her legal birth name and the name on her original records is Rachel Meghan Markle. That is the name under which the search was made.
On Lilibet's birth certificate, which was obtained by Access Hollywood, only one of Lily's parents was referenced.
The records office first reported no match for a child named Lily Diana Mountbatten Windsor, a name that had been circulating online in claims about Meghan's past. By itself, that meant little. Unverified names tied to unverified stories often lead nowhere. But the second result was far more significant. The office confirmed that a Miss Rachel Meghan Markle gave birth to a child in 1997. This was not rumor or online speculation. It was a result from a formal state record search. After that, the trail stopped because the records were sealed. Sealed birth records are not automatically suspicious. There are valid privacy and legal reasons for that. What stands out here is not just that the records were sealed, but when it happened. People who have studied the case keep coming back to the timing, and no clear explanation has been given. Records that would normally have remained in the public archive were closed off during the same period Meghan's public profile was starting to grow. That does not prove anything by itself, but it creates a gap, and gaps in official records do not explain themselves. This was not the only unusual record issue from that period. Her first marriage to film producer Trevor Engelson raises questions as well. The marriage records were sealed, and according to people close to the family, neither her father nor her mother knew the wedding was taking place.
Married to Trevor Engelson, a film producer, but they split in August 2013. They were together for 9 years, and
2 people were reportedly pulled in at the last minute to act as witnesses. They were not close friends, not relatives, and not people with any lasting tie to the couple. For someone who later made family narratives such a major part of her public image, that level of secrecy around the biggest legal commitment of her life at the time stands out. The marriage to Trevor Engelson ended in 2013, and the divorce appears to have been handled in much the same way. Once again, the public record seems thinner than expected. This matters for a simple reason. Social media rumors can be invented, anonymous sources can be made up, but gaps in official records are different. You cannot fake the absence of a document, and you cannot invent a sealed file. What you can do is ask why something that should be accessible is not, and why no one has given a direct answer. So the records exist, they are sealed, and they point to a child born in 1997. The next obvious question is who else was involved? That is where this stops being just a puzzle about missing documents and starts becoming a story involving real people. It is publicly confirmed that Meghan attended Northwestern University and graduated in 2003 with degrees in theater and international relations. What gets less attention is what her life looked like during those years and immediately after, the relationship she had, the choices she made, and the people around her before the public version of her was fully formed. During that time, she began dating a man named Joe Giuliano. That is not just internet gossip. His place in her life has been mentioned in multiple independent accounts from people who were in her social circle then. What remains disputed is what reportedly happened between them and how it fits into the timeline.
Now, where is Joe Giuliano, Meghan Markle's alleged for legal purposes first husband? Apparently, he's living a quiet...
According to people who say they are close to the story, Meghan and Joe had a son together, reportedly named Noel, born around 1999. That does not match the 1997 record, and that difference should be acknowledged, not ignored. Still, it fits a larger pattern, a stretch of Meghan's life from the late 1990s into the early 2000s where records become scarce, personal accounts clash, and the official story offers very little. Some who claim to know the family have pointed to physical similarities between Noel, Meghan, and Joe. That is the kind of claim outsiders cannot verify and can easily dismiss. But it has come up more than once from different sources. That does not prove it is true, but repeated details like that are usually more common in real stories than invented ones. What gives the Joe Giuliano story more weight is what is said to have happened later. The claim is that after Meghan's public profile began rising, she contacted Joe through legal channels, not to reconnect, but to warn him against speaking publicly about their past. According to the same accounts, that was followed by a cleanup. Photos disappeared, messages were removed. Both the digital and paper trail linking them became much harder to trace than you would expect for 2 people who were reportedly in a real relationship.
So the father, Joe Giuliano, the father of Lucia, might be waiting for Lucia to get her payout. I know it all sounds very crazy.
It is important to separate the 2 claims here. They are often bundled together, but they do not depend on each other. If Noel exists and is Meghan's child, that is one issue. If Meghan later contacted a former partner through legal channels to warn him not to speak, that is another and in some ways the more revealing one because it points to behavior, not biology. Even if the child claim is wrong, the alleged response still matters. People do not usually erase records, remove photos, or threaten legal action over a relationship from 20 years ago unless they believe there is something worth controlling. So even if one part of the story fails, the reported effort to scrub that period of her life may still tell its own story. This is not about forcing a final conclusion. It is about laying out the claims, checking them against the timeline, noting where the accounts line up and where they do not, and being honest about what remains unresolved. What remains unresolved is simple. A sealed 1997 birth record exists. A relationship with Joe Giuliano existed, and the documentation needed to connect those facts into a clear timeline is unusually hard to access. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is a set of facts with a missing section in the middle. The internet usually makes stories like this worse. It moves too fast, skips verification, adds extra details and connects dots that may have nothing to do with each other. Soon, the original claim is buried under something bigger, louder, and easier to tear apart. And when that larger story falls apart, the smaller facts inside it often disappear with it.
I guess the heat was too much for Joe Giuliano, and he eventually moves the child to Italy and still keeps...
Once the internet grabs a story that might be true, the solid parts and the invented parts usually get tangled together. When the fake part falls apart, the real part often gets buried with it. That is what happened with Joe Giuliano. At some point, the label Ghost Groom appeared and quickly took over the story. No one can clearly trace where it began, which says a lot on its own. But once the phrase caught on, it spread fast. Forums lit up. YouTube channels that had been quietly guessing suddenly drew huge audiences. Random screenshots circulated. Blurry photos of unknown blonde men were passed around as proof. People with no direct link to the original materials spoke as if they had first-hand knowledge. As the noise grew, the actual issue got buried. The sealed record and the confirmed relationship were still the core questions, but they were drowned out by layers of speculation. The version that spread fastest was the claim of a secret marriage. Not just a romance or a child, but a hidden wedding, a concealed legal union, and a marriage license that Meghan had supposedly suppressed and that someone was about to reveal. That was the claim that went viral, and it did not stand up. No marriage license appeared. No verifiable wedding photos surfaced. No confirmed witnesses were named. The dates did not match, and the story kept changing depending on who told it. Over time, even some of the people pushing the theory started backing away, not publicly or clearly, but quietly through deleted videos, follow-up posts, and abandoned comment threads. The ghost groom theory fell apart. And once it did, the whole Joe Giuliano story was pushed aside as a debunked conspiracy and largely dropped from mainstream discussion.
Ethnic, and she's been married. She already has a kid from someone, or divorced. I mean, everything you're not supposed to.
The problem is that the collapse of the marriage claim had nothing to do with the sealed birth record. They were never the same kind of evidence, and they were never the same kind of claim. The secret marriage story was an unverified allegation about a legal event that ended up with no supporting documents. The birth record issue is different. It came from a formal government record search that confirmed a child was born in 1997 to Rachel Meghan Markle, with the details sealed. That record was not created by the ghost groom theory. It existed before that theory took off, remained during it, and still exists after the theory fell apart. But online, people treated the failure of the marriage claim as if it disproved everything. Anyone who tried to separate the birth record from the wilder rumors got grouped in with people posting blurry photos and unsupported claims. That is not random, it is a pattern. And it works very well for anyone who wants a real and uncomfortable question buried under a louder, fake one. Let the noise grow. Let the weak claims spread. Then, once the whole thing collapses, the legitimate question disappears with it. Not because it was answered, but because it became too surrounded by chaos to be heard. The real question was never whether Joe Giuliano secretly married Meghan Markle. The real question was why a sealed 1997 birth record exists under her legal name, who the child was, and why no one in a position to answer has addressed it directly. That question did not go away when the ghost groom theory collapsed. It simply became harder to hear. And when an unresolved issue goes quiet, it usually resurfaces somewhere else. When attention around Joe Giuliano faded, it did not disappear. It shifted inward, toward someone closer to Meghan. Someone with no real distance from her life and no believable way to say he did not know her.
Certificate, and you know very well because you've watched the videos that they said that there were no records.
Shaun Johnson is Meghan's cousin, not some distant relative with no real connection to her life. He comes from the same family and would have known parts of her past that the public story barely touches. Most people had never heard of him until his name started appearing in the same online spaces that had been focused on Joe Giuliano. What drew attention was not a document, a photo, or a direct accusation. It was what Shaun Johnson reportedly did not say. When asked whether Meghan had been pregnant with his child, his reported response was roughly, "She looked pregnant, and that's me standing with her." What matters is the shape of that answer. He did not call the claim false, ridiculous, or offensive. He did not clearly defend Meghan or himself. He simply described what the image seemed to show and confirmed he was in it, without clearly confirming or denying anything. That is not a firm denial. It is a careful response that leaves the question open. And that matters because the words were reportedly his. He had the chance to shut the story down completely, and he did not do it. Of course, that could mean several things. He may have been cautious for legal reasons. He may have thought the question was beneath him. Or he may simply have been caught off guard and answered badly.
He said, some of this stuff is just so harsh, and I know it's fake. You just tried to...
There may be calmer ways to explain this, and that matters. But the fact that those explanations exist does not make the reaction any less striking. It simply means the truth is unclear, and by now, that kind of uncertainty is part of the pattern. What makes the Shaun Johnson moment important is not the theory around it. It is how closely it matches the rest of the story. People said Joe Giuliano stayed silent and then faded from view. Trevor Engelson, Meghan's first husband, has never given a meaningful interview about their marriage. Thomas Markle, despite speaking more than anyone else in her family, has been discredited so heavily that many dismiss his words before hearing them. And Shaun Johnson, when given a clear chance to answer, gave a response that revealed nothing while hinting at a lot. The pattern is the same in every case. None of these people openly call Meghan a liar. They are not making direct accusations, showing evidence, or putting clear claims on the record. They are simply refusing to back up her version of events. That kind of silence is specific. It does not sound like people with nothing to say. It sounds like people who believe speaking plainly would cost them more than staying quiet. When people who could speak choose not to, they are usually protecting something. Whether that is themselves, another person, or some private agreement, no outsider can say for sure.
Well, he went to them, but I know this is not going to end well. And
the same pattern showing up across different people, relationships, and years is hard to dismiss as chance. And when silence is intentional, a system often grows around it to keep that silence in place. That system is usually hard to spot. From the outside, it does not look obvious. It looks like scattered, unrelated events. A source who planned to speak suddenly cannot be reached. A record that should be easy to find is missing. Someone who once spoke openly goes silent without explanation. On their own, those moments may seem minor. But repeated across many people over time, they begin to look less like coincidence and more like a structure. Tom Bowers saw this while researching his book on Meghan and Harry. He is not a tabloid figure. He is a well-known investigative biographer in Britain with a strong record of deeply sourced work on powerful people. He said researching Meghan was unlike anything he had faced before. Sources who first agreed to talk stopped replying. People who had known her for years with no clear reason to protect her suddenly became unavailable. Documents that should have been easy to get were missing. Andrew Morton, who wrote another major book on the couple, described much the same thing. He said the story seemed to keep closing in on itself and that Meghan's past appeared to have been managed in ways that went beyond normal privacy. Both men still published their books and found enough material to continue. But in interviews, both described a level of resistance that did not feel natural. It felt organized. An organization takes resources along with people who know exactly who to contact and when. Who knows how to apply pressure without leaving proof behind? Who can spot a threat before it goes public and shut it down quietly? That is not some dark conspiracy theory. It is simply how a strong, well-funded PR machine works. The alleged letter from Samantha is where this shifts from vague suspicion to something more concrete. A physical letter appeared. Screenshots spread fast. Handwriting experts were brought in. The internet quickly split in two. One side believed it was real and showed Samantha knew things that were being kept buried. The other side thought it was staged, too neat and too perfectly written to be natural. What most people did agree on was the timing. The letter surfaced just as Meghan was trying to reshape her public image. The Suits period was over. The early royal chapter was over. She was moving into a lifestyle and wellness brand, with a new platform, a new audience, and a new version of her story. The letter landed right in the middle of that shift, like a direct hit. Whether it was real or fake, it appeared at the exact moment it could do the most damage. That is either a remarkable coincidence or a sign that someone knew exactly how to work the news cycle. Samantha said nothing. No denial, no confirmation, no statement through a publicist, nothing at all. That long silence can be read in two ways. Either she refused to engage or she made the smartest move available. If the letter was real, confirming it could create legal trouble. If it was fake, denying it would only keep the story alive. Staying silent was the one choice that left every option open.
It lead to a lot of hurt feelings on everyone's part, and I'm hoping that we can have a happy end.
Then there is Thomas Markle. He paid for Meghan's education, attended her first wedding, and says he was there for key parts of the life she later presented differently to the public. Since she entered the royal world, the way he has been treated has felt unusually deliberate. He was not simply pushed aside. His credibility was weakened in advance. Before he said anything truly damaging, the conditions were already set so that anything he said later would be met with doubt. By the time he began sharing specific details about her past, many people were already prepared to dismiss him. That is not just family conflict. That looks more like a coordinated campaign. Taken together, the pattern matters. Authors ran into barriers. The letter appeared at a highly sensitive moment. Samantha stayed silent. Thomas Markle was discredited early. None of this needs one huge revelation to be important. It only requires someone willing to ask what kind of person builds a system like this, and what that system is meant to protect. Because the questions that system was built to contain did not disappear. They shifted. They moved from her past, her family, and missing pieces in California records into an area that made all the earlier questions seem smaller by comparison. By the time Archie was born in May 2019, that system had been working for nearly 2 years. The media story was tightly controlled. Family members who might have complicated it had been pushed aside or discredited. Meghan's public image had been reinforced so often that challenging it meant risking harsh labels. Everything appeared to be under control, which is why what happened next was so hard for many people to absorb. The questions about Archie's birth did not begin where most people would expect.
Harrison Mountbatten Windsor arrived May 6th. Not at their new home Frogmore Cottage like many had expected.
The doubts did not begin with anonymous forums or fringe YouTube channels. Those came later and added confusion to a story already circulating among people who claimed to be close to it. What sparked the issue was a set of specific inconsistencies in the official account of Archie's birth. Questions focused on the Portland hospital, including the timeline, staffing, and the sequence of events described publicly. According to people said to know the institution, those details did not match what was seen or not seen on the relevant dates. One source in the original transcript went further and called the public birth story completely fabricated. Not polished, not partly edited, but fabricated. That word was used on purpose. The claim was not that small details were adjusted for privacy. It was that the public version was fundamentally different from what actually happened. That gap is what led to the surrogate question. If the birth did not happen the way it was described, the obvious next question is, what did happen? Several separate voices, apparently without coordinating, reached the same conclusion, that Archie and later Lilibet may not have been carried by Meghan. Surrogacy itself is not scandalous. It is a normal medical path for many families and carries no moral issue. The reason this question matters is not the use of a surrogate, it is what hiding it would mean. If a surrogate was used and the public was told otherwise, that would not be simple medical privacy. It would be a deliberate false account of a major fact, presented through official channels and sustained for years with apparent support from multiple institutions.
Certificate also confirms that the sweet couple's newborn daughter Lily was born on June 4th at Santa Barbara.
According to one source quoted in the transcript, Buckingham Palace was part of it. The claim is clear. Harry, Meghan, and the palace all knew what really happened and agreed on the version given to the public. That would mean more than a private decision kept hidden. It would suggest an institutional cover-up involving the royal family over the origins of children who are now in the line of succession. If that were true, the issue would reach far beyond Meghan's personal story. It would raise serious questions about the honesty of one of the most watched institutions in the world. Calls for a DNA test have now appeared in enough places that they can no longer be dismissed as pure fringe talk. People who say they are close to the story have raised it. So have commentators who have been right about other details, including in spaces not known for extreme royal gossip. Whether such a test could ever happen or whether anyone could force or formally request one is another matter. But the fact that the idea keeps coming up from people who seem unconnected is, by itself, notable. Through all of this, the surrogacy claims, the questions about the birth story, the accusation of an institutional cover-up, and the repeated calls for DNA testing, Meghan has said nothing. No denial, no comment through a spokesperson, not even a vague statement meant to brush it off. just total silence. That silence can look like confidence, but real confidence usually looks different. When claims are this detailed and keep resurfacing, someone with nothing to hide would normally make at least one clear statement. That costs little and can shut the issue down. This silence does not end the discussion. It keeps the question alive while refusing to answer it, which is not how someone usually acts when they believe the claim is ridiculous.
Children as pawns so much. We're only going to let you see our children if you behave in a certain way and we can control.
This is what the silence looks like when someone believes answering the question is riskier than ignoring it. But that only works as long as everyone with part of the real story still thinks staying quiet helps them. The second one of them decides otherwise, the silence breaks. Not with gossip or another post online, but with something solid and irreversible. That is the moment the whole system was built to avoid. The only open question is whether it can hold. At its core, this story is not about one dramatic reveal. It is about a pattern. And patterns matter even without one final piece of proof. They matter when too many details keep pointing the same way. A sealed birth record with no clear explanation. A first marriage her own parents allegedly did not know about. A former partner said to have been pressured into silence. A cousin who had the chance to deny something serious and did not. Two respected British biographers describing Meghan research as unusually obstructed. A letter that surfaced at the most damaging possible moment. A father whose credibility was weakened before he could do real harm. And repeated questions about the children's origins coming from people who do not seem connected to each other. None of that proves everything. But it does justify asking questions. Samantha Markle began with claims few people took seriously. The press brushed them aside. Online, many mocked them. But over time, some of the issues she raised became harder to dismiss. The suggestion here is that she may still be holding back more. And the real issue is when she will use it and whether anyone will be prepared when she does. If you have followed this far, then you already know this story is not finished. The documents are still out there. The people involved are still here, and the silence holding it all together has already shown signs of strain. When Tom Bowers spoke, when Shaun Johnson gave the answer he gave, and when the California Records Office confirmed what it confirmed, none of those moments looked huge on their own. But each one moved the story forward. Stories like this keep moving only when people keep paying attention. If something here made you pause, if one detail felt off, or if you are now thinking about a question you were not asking before, hit like. That is what helps this reach the next person who should be paying attention too. Share with someone who follows the royal story closely, especially someone who thinks they already know it all. And subscribe if you want to see what comes out next, because more usually does. If the system was built to keep this quiet, the least anyone can do is refuse to stay quiet about it.